Thank you very much. We have 4 more interventions, and then I need about 5 or 10 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Brock, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Reza, over a year ago, in fact, February 22nd, 2023, this committee received a letter from your Assistant DM, Policy Planning and Communications, Mr. Irecci, concluding a first tranche of documents that had been ordered by this committee. In that letter, your department promised that there would be more documents to come and promised that a second tranche would arrive well over a year ago, March the 3rd, 2023. Who directed your department not to provide these documents to the committee within that time frame?
Thank you very much for the question. I believe that the work is still underway. There's about 20 to 40,000 pages that need to be translated and collated, and the minimum redactions being done. I do believe they're on their way to you.
And you didn't see fit to update this committee?
I apologize. I should have started with that.
Okay. Can we have another tranche of documents delivered to this committee within 3 weeks?
I will do my utmost to do that, yes.
Okay. You referred 3 IT companies to the RCMP regarding fraudulent contracting, a value of close to $5 million with a time frame of 2018 to 2022. Who are they?
Thank you very much for the question. Just for precision, they're actual resources. So they're the consultants or the IT specialists that...
But who are they?
I'm going to have to turn to Madame Poulin, who has the oversight.
Madame Poulin? Identity, please.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. As the Deputy Minister said, these are individuals. They were the ones who were referred to the RCMP to maintain the integrity of the RCMP. We cannot provide the names of those resources. Thank you.
Is subject to an RCMP investigation, and an argument could have been made that we are preserving their integrity. There's still a presumption of innocence. People get identified every single day in this country when they're charged with a criminal offense. I'll ask you again, will you identify those 3 IT companies that have been referred to the RCMP?
Consult internally, and we'll see what we can do in order to provide those names.
Can you provide some context as to the size of those companies? We know at this point, GC Strategies, a small 2-person company, fleecing Canadian taxpayers for close to $60 million, all the way now to McKinsey, the largest strategy consulting firm in the world with 30,000 consultants across 65 countries. Again, potentially under RCMP investigation. So what are the sizes of the companies under investigation now?
Si vous permettez, je vais commencer. Let me just start, just for clarity. These are individuals. So how this came to light is that there would be maybe an individual working for 2 different companies and charging the Crown for the same time. So it's not really about the companies at this time, it's about the individual consultants working. So those names have been referred to the RCMP for criminal proceedings. And I'm going to stop here and swivel for a moment.
Okay. About a month ago, we heard from your minister, Duclos, and Minister Anand, that this was only the first tranche of potential fraudulent activity against the Canadian taxpayer. How many waves, how many tranches can the Canadian public expect to hear about?
Thank you for the question. Let me start. First off, this is a new data analytical capacity.
I'm not concerned about that, Ms. Reza. Ms. Reza, the question is very specific. How many other tranches, how many other waves of further criminal investigations can we expect? We got the impression from your minister and Minister Anand that there was going to be a review of all the contractors who have been potentially subject to investigations by the RCMP, investigations by the Auditor General. We know that there's 635 similar IT middlemen operating in the same capacity as GC Strategies. Are all of those 635 IT middlemen being investigated for potential fraudulent activities?
Thank you for the question. The investigations are targeting individuals who are awarded several contracts different firms. At the end of March, we also announced that we are stepping up data analysis. It is likely that we may obtain other results concerning individuals, consultants that are recruited by prime contractors and can bill the federal government for work on many or multiple contracts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jawari,
Point of order,
please.
Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Genos?
Yeah, Chair, during Mr. Brock's round of questions, he put a very direct question to the witness regarding the names of companies. The witness indicated that she didn't want to provide an answer. That's lovely, but we are a parliamentary committee, and we have a history of using the tools that the House provides us with to insist on answers. So I would, in respect of those rules, like you to put the question to the witness, Chair, with the witness understanding that we expect an answer on the question in order to not be in contempt of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. And it's a good point. Colleagues, this is the exact same issue we had with Mr. Firth, where very clear direct answers or questions were put, and he refused to answer. And I'm not saying we're going down the same path as Mr. Firth, but a very clear question was provided, and I think the committee deserves a very clear answer. If you are going to provide it to us in writing, the name of the resources, that will be acceptable to us, I think, the committee.
Je répète ma réponse. Je vais consulter.
Let me repeat, I carried out internal consultations and we did everything we could while respecting legal requirements and privacy requirements to provide names to the committee. It's not that we don't want to answer.
There, I'm sorry, but we've been through this repeatedly. We've had the law clerk with us. Sorry, Mr. Genuis, I have the floor. We've been through this repeatedly with various departments, yourself included. This committee and Parliament supersedes privacy law. It was a very clear question. We would just like, again, I think it was 3 resources you mentioned, 3 companies. I think after everything we've seen with GC and this report, I think it's fair to ask that you do provide it to us so we can avoid perhaps the issue Mr. Genuis was referring to. Can you do that for us, Ms. Reza?
I certainly can. I just want to add a footnote to this. I believe that there's a production order, and this is probably part of the hesitancy, so we will come back with the names, understanding that.
Okay.
Sorry, point of order.
No, let me.
Okay.
I think the question is pretty clear, and my request is that this is provided. I don't think we wish it would be part of the production order. If you could provide it separately, as has been requested by Mr. Brock, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
So I apologize. I'm saying that those names are under a production order right now for the RCMP, but we're going to come back to you. I wasn't proposing anything else. Thank you.
When can we get that information then, please?
Well, we'll try over the next few days to see exactly what the assessment is and provide it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Genuis. Mr. Brock has the floor.
Again, I don't believe the Deputy Minister truly appreciates the role of parliamentary committees. As the Chair has indicated, privacy is trumped by this committee. The fact that you received a production order by the RCMP for the identity of those 3 sources does not in any way allow you to prevent this committee from receiving those names. There is no legal impediment for you to deliver those names to this committee. The issue of privacy is not relevant. And as I've indicated already, every single person...
Mr. Brock, I'm just going to interrupt you there.
Yes.
I think I've been clear. We'll say by Friday, please provide this information, as been requested by Mr. Brock, and provided in writing to our clerk.
Point of order, Chair. Are the witnesses committing to provide that information or to come back with some further thoughts on whether or
They will provide the
not?
information that Mr. Brock has requested by this Friday.
The committee agrees to that, to require that. Okay, good.
Wonderful. Apologize. We are with Mr. Jouari, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back, Madam President, your team. I'm going to ask a number of rapid questions, trying to make a point that I think Canadians deserve to understand. So, from a best practices in the industry, when it comes to procurement, what is the trend? Have you seen a trend that a lot of organizations are moving away from the task base into a solution based and outcome based? Yes or no?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that the government of Canada, as well as private industry, are always looking for agility in procurement, and moving from task-based to solutions is a key piece of that. And it's also going to be supported in terms of what we do with our own HR policies and staff augmentation that are public servants, as well as project management. Moving to more holistic solutions is where we'd like to go in this space.
That the solution base allows the organization to flourish and also be able to work better together to come up with an ultimate outcome that the task-based solution will not allow.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that there are niche uses for both. From a client perspective, having a solution is probably a very helpful approach in terms of digital delivery.
Thank you, and I'm glad you talked about the niche approach. So when an organization, the government of Canada, is going through a large business transformation under many aspects, whether it's the process, whether it's the people, whether it's the technology, whether it's the back end, when you're going through a huge transformation at that scale, benchmarking is one of those activities that really will benefit from a solution-based approach rather than a task-based approach. And if traditionally we have done a task-based approach, as you are trying to understand the requirement and you decide that a solution-based approach is a better fit for that transformation, it's logical to change. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think those decisions are made in consultation with the client and the business requirement, and that procurement strategy evolves and it looks at those different elements.
So I will take that as a yes. Okay, now let's go talk about the National Master Standing Offer, or NMSO. For Canadians, for simple Canadians like me, okay, what would be an equivalent of a National Master Standing Order? If I use the terminology of a standard purchase order, would that make sense?
I think trying to explain the policy instrument, I think you have to think of it as a catalog of a very specific store.
Okay.
That sells benchmarking and data properly.
Perfect. But that does not in any way means that there was no process before the issuance of a National Master Standing Offer for looking at the vendor, evaluating the vendor, making sure that they are qualified, and then issuing up to 5 National Master Standing Order or Master Purchase Order for example, benchmarking, which could cover a gamut of activities such as people transformation, such as technology transformation, such as process transformation, such as documentation transformation. All of those are various type of services that we do and the department goes to, and they need to do benchmarking against all of those to be able to go to the transformation. Is that a fair statement to make?
That is a fair statement to make, and if you permit me to add, I would also note that one of the key elements of establishing those National Master Standing Offers is that we did it in a very transparent way. It may have been unique to the various vendors in question. McKinsey is today's topic, but we actually had it out. It was posted, it was published, and they're aware. I draw to your attention, even in recompeting based on some of the guidance that was received and observations of the Procurement Ombudsman, we sent it out recently, I think in June 2023, to 5,000 suppliers. Only 13 have come back to us because it's such a niche space, but we've opened it to make that playing field transparent for procurement purposes.
Thank you. So I would say going to a solution-based contract from a task-based contract, when you're in that specific niche activity, this is something that's quite logical. So there is no conspiracy in there. That's just right way of doing business. And having a master standing offer, actually 5 of those among 5 competing top benchmarking organization, there is no hidden agenda in there, aside from making sure that we have, as a government, access to 5 best practices across that spectrum. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct. And moreover, it was an attempt to make it more efficient for the government to procure those services.
Thanks very much. Mr. Genius, and then we have Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Thank you, Chair. One observation, it was said earlier that the procurement ombudsman did not find fraud. I would just say he also did not find pickles, because that wasn't what he's looking for. His mandate isn't to lay criminal charges. I do expect criminal charges will be laid in relation to government procurement. We've already had one contractor's house raided, but time will tell. I did want to ask about the issue of money being paid back in relation to the ArriveCan scandal. Parliament passed a motion asking for money to be paid back. Christian Firth testified that no one had even asked him about returning money. Ms. Reza, have you had conversations with the minister about this? Is the minister seeking information or seeking processes to have that money paid back, or not?
Thank you very much for the question. Restitution is something that we look at across various elements of ArriveCan and other cases like we just described. We have had conversations. I've advised the minister that the issue is with legal, looking at the various approaches that can be dealt with, and with the client whose budget it is. So I don't know if you have anything further, Karen.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, though, the House prescribed a timeline. Do you have a timeline? Clearly, it's not the House's timeline, because the House's timeline has elapsed. Do you have a timeline on this from legal?
I'm going to ask Catherine, who's closer to.
Thank you for the question. For the files being mentioned on overbilling, when there's a bill that clearly shows that there was overbilling by specific suppliers, it's possible for us.
The process. I want to know what is being done to get this money back in accordance with the House order. The time has elapsed on it. What is your timeline for reporting back, asking for the money, advising the House on next steps?
Thank you very much for the question. We'll have to come back with a written response in terms of Department of Justice and CBSA in terms of next steps for restitution for ArriveCan.
Okay. There's not much more to be said, except that I don't think that's acceptable. We'll wait for your written response. But the House passes a motion, prescribes a timeline, asking for the money to be asked for back. And we're well past that timeline, and we're hearing that essentially it's in the process of being studied. That's clearly not good enough, but we'll look for a response. Fundamentally, this is on the government for setting those expectations. Now, I was a bit. You were a bit ambiguous in your response on the particular aspect of favoritism in the McKinsey report from the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman found that favoritism was shown towards McKinsey. You seem to say that you agreed with the findings of the report, and yet also that you seem to not to be clear on whether you agreed with the finding of favoritism. Did the government show favoritism towards McKinsey?
Thank you very much for the question. So in terms of PSPC's position on findings and recommendations, we agreed with the Procurement Ombudsman's report. His conclusions, which is he himself has come here and spoken about the fact that he is making negative inferences, PSPC is a little bit more nuanced. We have found no examples of favoritism. These cases PSPC is not involved in. These, in 110, the 4 factors in terms of favoritism are based on many contracts of small value. And as a contract authority, as a common service provider, we haven't issued that many to be able to make the assessment that this is an accurate bias.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the evidence, he provides a report in which he demonstrates, I think, clearly the reasons why he came to the conclusion that favoritism was involved. Based on your reading of the report, do you agree that the government showed favoritism for McKinsey? Is there a recognition of that finding, or are you skeptical about that finding?
In terms of, thank you very much for the question. In terms of the conclusion, PSPC has also noted in a document that it doesn't have the same assumptions as the Procurement Ombudsman. I don't know if you'd like to add
Can we just get a yay or nay, though? Like, do you accept the conclusion that favoritism was shown for McKinsey, or do you not? I mean, either position, would be a fair answer. But I just like to know, really, from the deputy minister, it's do you accept the findings, or do you not accept the findings?
I do not accept the findings, although PSPC is not impacted in it, so it's a little bit difficult.
I'm sorry. Did you say you do not, or you do?
I do not accept that there is favoritism for McKinsey in the current system, based on our assessment as a common service provider.
Okay, so you're not accepting the conclusions of the report in this sense.
If you allow me to jump in.
No. I've got one more question to.
You have about 10 seconds, so make it very brief. A very brief answer.
Okay. Should McKinsey, because of their broader conduct, be on a blacklist? Why were they being contracted at all, in light of all the things we know about their behavior, conflicts of interest around the world, human rights abuses, etc.?
I'm afraid you should have left it at a yes or no. I don't think we're going to have time for a fulsome. Perhaps you can get back to us in writing, though. Mr. Kuzmierczak, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for being here with us today and providing us with some insights and shedding some light on the world of government procurement. We certainly have learned a lot over the last number of weeks. And again, knowing just the scale of procurement that takes place by the federal government, I think it's 300,000 contracts annually, is just a massive amount of work. I wanted to ask Ms. Reza, my colleague had used the word collusion, and I know that you had taken exception to that word, and you were just about to, I think, speak to it a little bit. And why you took exception to that word. And I think you ran out of time, if I'm not mistaken. So I just wanted to give you the floor and just to speak about, again, favoritism and also collusion in procurement.
Thank you very much for allowing me to follow up, because we did want to come back and talk about what we're doing for measures of collusion to ensure that the procurement system has an integrity. But I think it's worthwhile to circle back to the issue that we just went with in terms of the findings and recommendations as it relates to favoritism. At PSPC, we look at the Procurement Ombudsman report and we look across it to see how we can best apply it, how we can best put in best practices, and how we can adjust. So in terms of this particular element, it's difficult for us because we do hundreds of thousands of contracts, and we need to be able to assess the broader bidder pool. So, for example, how many times did McKinsey compete, to be able to assess was there favoritism? Is this structured on these very, modest contracts? And we have to look at the contract value to see whether or not, when they were sole sourced, it exceeded what they competed for. There's a lot of different assumptions that we need to unpack and work with the procurement ombudsman. So I'm a little bit the favoritism, while PSPC as a common service provider was not implicated in the findings, there's one small contract, I do want to be able to give a thoughtful response and make sure that, we're not offside, because there are so many recommendations and best practices here. Je vais me tourner.
Yeah, thank you. And also, when you look at, for instance, from my standpoint, is that you need to look, is there positive, concrete evidence that would demonstrate that PSPC did favor McKinsey over another supplier? And, I know that the ombuds draw some negative inference for the lack of information, but I think when we drill down at PSPC contract, we cannot accept the fact that there is evidence that would show that, there was a preferential treatment that was afforded to McKinsey. There's no such evidence on file.
One of the things we heard is that today is that PSPC, for example, or the procurement officers work together. There's an iterative process, a back and forth process at times between the procurement officers and the vendors. Can you just explain why that is appropriate to have that sort of exchange back and forth between the procurement officers and the vendors?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the procurement ombudsman also spoke about this in terms of having industry participation, because we have to make sure we're shaping a solicitation that is not too restrictive, that is encouraging open competition. So we need to have the dialogue with the supplier base to see, is this doable? Are the timelines going to be met? So there is a certain level of back and forth as the strategy is being shaped. And once we move into a solicitation phase, it becomes a much more gated, transparent element of the process where that continuum has changed and it's a more formal response. But Molly?
Thank you for the question. And I think what I would add here is that when looking at the types of contracting that was done in the instance of McKinsey, you have the full range in the sense that we've used supply arrangements, standing offer, as well as competitive processes and sole source. So in each of those instances, there would be a different type of engagement with the industry members that would have been competing. So for instance, for the large value contracts, we would have had a open process that we would have had a fairness monitor. We would have had others that would be involved to make sure that open, fair, transparent. In certain other circumstances, such as a low dollar value contract, it's completely appropriate for us to deal directly with the supplier to negotiate the best possible price and to work through that together. It's a negotiation process. So it really is on a spectrum, and there are very clear guidelines and frameworks that are used for that type of industry engagement. And as the Deputy Minister has indicated, it's encouraged that we engage with our supplier community, and it's something that we take very seriously to ensure it's done professionally. And that's something we also work with our client departments on, who are the technical authorities. They're the ones responsible for defining the actual requirements of an individual contract. So it's very important that they also be involved in this and respect the integrity of the process. So that's something that our procurement officers work very hard to do as well.
Thank you very much. And we are done with our witnesses. Ms. Reza, Ms. Royds, Mr. Laporte, and Ms. Palen, thank you for joining us again. You're welcome to stay and listen to the riveting discussion on our budget if you wish, but otherwise you are dismissed. Colleagues, we're just going to go in.
Mr. Chair, I've got something I'd like to talk about.
Let me please get to my stuff, sir. Colleagues, we're just going to do the budgets. It has been distributed to everyone. Again, these are the upper limits. There's $24,750 for Canada Post, rural and remote communities. All in agreement? Wonderful. And same amount for study on our red tape reduction modernization study. All in agreement? Thank you very much. Two items, and yes, I'll get to you, Mr. Perkins. Two items quickly. Mr. Firth in our committee of the whole, when he was called in the bar, was asked several questions that he promised to respond back to us. He has responded. It is just getting translated right now, so will be sent out to members, but it is the members' responsibility to check to make sure the questions or the answers are satisfactory, or if they were answered. So, sake of argument, if Mr. Lewis asked for something and it's no response, it's up to Mr. Lewis to advise the committee of that. So probably end of week or early next week. So when you have it, keep an eye on it. Again, it's your responsibility. Canada Post and the main estimates, we're running into some headwinds from the ministers. We were going to have the president of Canada Post here May 29th. Lo and behold, TBS, Minister Anand and Minister Duclos both insisting they're only available on that date as well. So we'd be looking at 16 witnesses, and with our new setup, they would be out in the hallway. So we're trying to arrange different times, perhaps a 4-hour meeting on the Wednesday so we can accommodate everyone and we don't have 16 people in here for an hour. I will let everyone know, hopefully end of this week or early next week, if we have another solution. We might have to find another time for the president of Canada Post. If everyone will allow me flexibility with the president, we will do so, but it's certainly not our intention to have 16 witnesses in here for 2 hours on the mains in Canada Post rural. Was there something, Mr. Baccarat?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chair, thanks for all the legwork you're doing on this. It's frustrating. I wonder for the estimates if we could name specific individuals that we want as witnesses. It seems like a funny process where we say we want the minister and then 20 people show up. Like, it almost seems like an intentional kind of strategy to I'm not sure what the strategy is, but
Yeah.
it seems like a way to kind of muddy the waters and dilute what is really about accountability.
That's always been my reaction over the years, but it's generally their support. So it'd be, sake of argument, Minister Anand and her DM and an ADM and maybe the CFO. So it's typical. It's just because it's 3 departments at once. And that's how we ended up.
The idea here, though, is to spread it out, because we have seen that before.
I'm hoping, yes, that we can find agreement to do it over 4 hours if they are only available on the 29th.
And then, if I may, we want the Canada Post CEO separately on our study, ideally.
That has been the declared will of the committee, that the President of Canada Post appears separately on the rural post office study.
And then I have one more matter related to Canada Post, but I don't know if you want to wrap this up first.
I prefer we could wrap it up because I see Mr. Perkins getting impatient, and we turn into.
Can I just throw out this one piece? It's very short, and I've spoken with you about it. But in the document order that was just returned from Canada Post regarding the closure of post offices since the 1994 moratorium, there is very scant information. We were very specific about what information we were requesting, and all that is provided is a number per year, two column list, and a number of post offices closed per year. We wanted specifically the communities in which they were closed and the reason for closure. Yep. So I would love to empower you, Mr. Chair, to go back to them and clarify the original request and demand the documents.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I noticed that myself, because that was something I think I added in, the reason for the closure. So if everyone's fine, we'll just write a letter to them asking, provide for the information.
Sure.
That's fine. Mr. Perkins, go ahead, keeping in mind we turn into pumpkins in about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm bringing up my favorite subjects, Stellantis and Volkswagen contracts. We've had a number of motions since December. I think MP Massey had one on here to try that attempted to find a solution back then to narrow the scope rather than just the whole contracts. And there have been lots of discussion by Liberal members that somehow if we release the whole contracts, there would be some sort of commercial sensitivity in that. So in the spirit of compromise, I've circulated to the clerk proposed motion that tries to accommodate the concerns of that were expressed by several other parties. Well, I believe that there is very little that's commercially sensitive in the contracts, because the ministers, the Liberal ministers and the Prime Minister and this committee have spoken at length about the number of jobs associated with each contract in both the construction and production phases. Then it should be absolutely of no commercial sensitivity for the government to release the clauses in the contracts related specifically to the job commitments in those contracts and make them public, since the 2,500, 2,700, 1,300, all those numbers that have been talked about in the House, in public, in the media, are not obviously commercially sensitive, so the clauses around those should be released. So the motion I won't read here because we're short on time. And the first part basically lists the companies that we're talking about. And in the second part says basically that we want the contract clauses that detail the job commitments, including any and all prohibitions or limits on the use of foreign replacement workers, any requirements that require Canadian citizens or permanent residents to be employed, any and all references to direct and indirect and induced job commitments, and any penalties outlined for failing contractual obligation. There's a few other things it asks for, once the committee has those, for ministers and officials from both the companies and the departments to appear to answer questions related to those job commitments. And since this is basically what the NDP has been asking for, and the Liberals have been saying, well, we can't release the whole contracts because they're commercially sensitive, this part isn't. And so I would find it hard to believe that anyone in this committee would vote against this motion. If you do, then there's obviously something else to hide that says that these commitments don't do what the government has said they do publicly. So I'll leave it at there since we're short on time, Mr. Chair, and consider this tabled, and hopefully we can vote on it today.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if we can suspend so we can actually read. It's the first time I'm laying eyes on this motion, so I'd like us to suspend and give us 10 minutes to read through it, please.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're not going to have resources for that. If we suspend, my hope, I'm not sure if there's, I see Mr. Backrack, but I'm not, we're not going to be able to do that because of lack of time. Is there a desire to vote on this right now, considering very similar outcome of what's today? Wednesday
do this on
to Mondays? Well, that's what I'm saying. Is there a desire then to vote on it? My worry is, yeah, we can go. We'll have to suspend in a few minutes, and I'd rather we kind of vote on it to put it to bed so that we don't interrupt our red tape Monday.
No, I would need time to actually read and study. I want to give Mr. Perkins's motion the due respect.
Okay, why don't we,
And so-
I can't suspend, but why don't we skip over to Mr. Backrack, and then we can come back to you on the speaking list first. Mr. Backrack?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And this is right at the end of the meeting. I don't think we can really do this justice in the time remaining. But I would note, and I know Mr. Massey came to OGGO at the last meeting and made this point on behalf of our party, but there are negotiations ongoing between the labor unions and the companies, and there is a real reluctance and opposition on the part of those unions to have this turned into a three-ring political circus because they feel like it's going to jeopardize those negotiations. And I'll just read specifically from a piece in iPolitics that I believe appeared yesterday. And this is a quote, I believe, from the Canadian Building Trades. And it says, while we are pleased that all parties are concerned with Canadian unionized jobs, we do not believe it is in the interest of our ongoing discussions in pursuit of memorandums of understanding with global automakers for such an expansive production order to be proceeded with at the current time while sensitive negotiations are being undertaken. Our preference would be to revisit this issue in 1 month to allow all parties to conclude negotiations. So, you know, I think this is an interesting line of inquiry. I think it is of interest to Canadians to know how these contracts deal with Canadian jobs. But right now, there are negotiations that are sensitive and that are ongoing, and I think it would behoove this committee to respect those negotiations by not proceeding with a document production order at this time.
Chuck, as I promised.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate what my colleague Mr. Backrack has stated. I mean, the CBTU, which is their concerns are at the center of this discussion and this debate. We're absolutely unequivocally clear that they see opening up the contracts at this point, especially at this sensitive point, as potentially undermining the conversations that they're having with Honda and with other companies. But more than that, again, we're in a situation where Mr. Perkins is asking us to listen and to follow him and completely ignore the voice, again, not just of CBTU, not just the voice of the Canadian Building Trades Union, but the voice of Unifor, again, the largest union in Canada, and the voice of, in my community, the president at the time, the president of Unifor Local 444, which represents, again, thousands of auto workers who work for Stellantis. These are folks that are, again, at the center of this discussion because this potentially has impacts on their livelihoods and their future and future